clarification here. When you talk about a manufacturer's rep, are you referring to you having the authority to basically sell certain manufacturers' products?
Yeah, sell their services or their products into the chemical plant. Yes, sir.
Okay. And so in essence, one of your manufacturers that you rep for is Luneta, correct?
That's correct.
And what does Luneta make? Isn't it little glassware or something like that?
It's a sight glass. What they make is sight glasses to put on tanks, so that way you know how high the level is in the tank. So that's what they do. That's their specialty.
And so if you went into a chemical plant and they needed sight glasses, you would go to Luneta and say, these are the specs we need, how much for this, and you get an estimate on what they're charging, correct?
That's correct.
And then once you get that information, you go back to Dow or whatever the refinery is, and then you provide your cost or what you're going to charge for providing that either item or the service. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, and then once you make the sale, Luneta will essentially either ship it to you and you ship it to your end user, or they ship it directly to your end user, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So, and then Luneta bills you, correct?
That's correct.
And when you get paid by your end user, you pay the bill, and what's left over is what you make as your profit, essentially.
That's correct. And that's the way we've always done business. PSA's always done that. As a matter of fact, before we represented PSA valve and machine. We represented VIR that does the exact same thing. They repaired valves. We also represented another company called Valve Source, and they did the exact same thing. So we were very familiar with that.
All right. So after you had your PSA Inc. and you were owning it for a decade or so, that's when you ended up saying, hey, or someone came up with the idea of let's create our own valve and machine shop. Is that essentially what it was?
Yeah. So what happened was Jose was in the office with us. I have a facility south of Houston. It's 10 acres. We built a beautiful facility there. And Jose joined, he came over in 2012, 2012, I believe it was, or 13. And he saw that I was representing other companies, Valve Source, VIR. He said, why don't we start a company and do the same thing, here. You have the facility to do it. And so he, here again, he was in charge of operations. So we did that. That's what we did.
Okay. And so PSA Inc. is essentially a manufacturer's rep for the PSA valve.
For a PSA valve machine. Yes. Yes, exactly.
Okay. And no different than you're a rep for Luneta,
VIR, or any other ones, right? Same.
Mr. Perez, we've talked to you a number of times about not interrupting the attorneys when they're asking questions. You need to stop doing that. The record's going to be all messed up. And so you need to stop doing that, please.
I apologize.
And so ultimately, you are a sales rep for all of these different.
Mr. Beecher, I get all of this. He's a manufacturer's rep. I understand that.
Okay.
And so with regard to PSA Inc., how many employees did you have there, prior to even PSA valve and machine getting formed?
We always have around 4 to 5 employees because we're basically salespeople.
And that would include Paula and then yourself and various sales reps?
Right, that's correct.
The PSA Valve and Machine LLC, and this you said was an idea that Jose came up with, correct?
That's correct.
And the initial owners of PSA Valve and Machine were who, to the best of your recollection?
RMP Group, which I was a part of with Jose, and 11 Ventures, which was the Patel brothers.
And do you remember the the percentage of ownership between RMP Group and 11 Ventures?
No, I don't.
Was it where 11 Ventures essentially owned 100% of the company and RMP Group only owned like 0.1%?
Objection
Did y'all,
calls for speculation, and the witness said he didn't know.
And
okay. With regard to that initial formation, who filed that paperwork for PSA Valve and Machine LLC?
Jose Rodriguez. He did all the paperwork for the entities.
And PSA Valve and Machine, I think you testified earlier, they went out of business probably right around the end of 2017. They stopped doing work, correct?
That's correct.
And obviously PSA Inc. stopped doing repping for them at that point forward, correct?
That is correct.
give me 1 second, guys.
It sounds good. Yeah, everything sounds good.
Sam, your wife doing all right?
Mhm.
She doing good?
Yeah.
I just remember last time she was having some procedure, I think, just.
That's
So-
right. She, you know what, for about 4 years in a row, in each April and May, there was, this year was a big procedure. She had a
Yeah.
stroke, I think 3 years ago, and then there's a rollover accident. So I'm trying to remember which one were we dealing with when that came up.
Gosh.
Because this has been going on about that long, but the month of April has been a bad month for us over the last 4 years.
Sounds
So,
like it. I was about to say I'd stay in home all April just to be safe.
yeah. So when you asked me that, I'm like, great, which one was it? 'Cause it kind of blends together, but
Yeah.
she, yeah, I still get on her if she tries to lift up stuff that, you know, starts moving stuff around. If she grabs a hose and wants to water
Right.
the lawn or something like that,
Well, good.
not
Glad
do
you're
it.
improving at least.
Thanks, guys. Sorry about that. Let's keep going.
Yes, Your Honor. All right, so with regard to PSA Valve and Machine, your role with Valve and Machine was essentially what?
Sales. I mean, with Valve Machine, no. PSA, I was a salesman for PSA. We brought the work to the shop and they did the work. So
Were you in charge of managing the work and all that was done within the shop then for Valve and Machine?
no, I'm never there.
And who was responsible for managing the work that those guys did in back?
Jose was the one that was in charge of the shop in the back.
Did you ever consider yourself one of the were you a manager for PSA valve and machine?
Was I a manager for PSA valve machine? I didn't consider myself a manager. I mean, my interest was with R&P Group. So
But the people who ran and operated PSA valve and machine, did you consider yourself one of the managers that ran and operated PSA valve and machine?
yeah, I guess you could say I was.
Okay. But you didn't have a title of some sort where you were an officer and a director?
No, I was not. No officer, no director.
And were you responsible for preparing any documents for PSA valve and machine from its startup until the end of 2017?
No, sir.
Who was the one primarily responsible for preparing different documents, like for PSA valve and machine from its inception till the end of 17?
Jose Rodriguez.
And those would be documents that would be filed with the Secretary of State, correct?
That is correct.
Any franchise tax forms?
That is correct.
And even when it comes to the IRS forms, you don't have any recollection of preparing any of those documents, correct?
No, not at all.
Did you ever prepare any operating agreements?
No, not that I recall. No.
And when it comes to setting up the account with Uno for valve and machine, who would have been responsible for the ones who set that account up?
Jose.
And earlier there was some reference as to whether or not he would, indicating that would Jose have ever had the authority to do anything on behalf of PSA Inc?
No.
Okay, was he an employee of PSA Inc?
For a short time, he was an employee of PSA Inc.
Do you know when that was?
I don't remember the time period, but I do remember he was an employee at some point.
Okay, would he been in a role where he could have signed a contract or an agreement or entered into an agreement with Uno Outsourcing?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Would he have had that authority to do that?
He wouldn't have had the authority for PSA Inc. No.
That's what I'm asking. He wouldn't have had any
Yes.
authority on behalf.
No, not with PSA Inc. No.
Do you know what he did for PSA Inc. when he worked briefly for PSA Inc?
He handled more of the finances, the financial documents, those sort of things. He was kind of the in-house accountant. My expertise is not in finances or accounting or anything like that. I'm a sales guy. So.
All right. And so any testimony to him, if he were to testify that he had authority to hire Uno or that he hired Uno on behalf of PSA Inc., that would not be accurate from PSA's Inc. standpoint, correct?
That would not be accurate. No, nor did we ever use Uno Outsource. PSA Inc. never used Uno Outsource. We had paychecks and then we did it in-house.
And again, there's some question that came up with some tax returns earlier. Those tax returns were just provided to us today, correct?
That is correct.
When we broke for lunch, correct?
That's correct.
And they are tax returns for PSA valve and machine for the years 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, correct?
That is correct.
Do you recall, did they have the exact same date that they were all filed?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. When I was questioning the witness about these documents, he purported to have no knowledge about them and was unable to discuss them or testify about them. And if he lacked the knowledge, then I imagine he would surely lack the personal knowledge now as well.
And I think I was just asking a question about the date that they were signed.
I've overruled the objection. You
Okay.
can answer.
And Lito, do you remember, did all 5 of the tax returns have the exact same date?
They had the exact same date on them. Yes, they did.
Okay, do you remember what that was?
Sometime in 18. I don't have them in front of me. Yeah, October 12th of 18.
And would you have ever, did you happen to look and see if any of these documents were provided by Jose to you at that time?
Did I look and see?
Yeah,
I've
did you
never
happen
seen,
to?
I never saw those documents until today.
So Jose had never sent them to you before, correct?
No, he never sent them to me.
Do you recall at any time R&P Group signing over any interest it had in PSA Valve and Machine to you individually?
No, sir.
Okay. Would you have ever received any type of unit certificates or share certificates from R&P Group showing that you had an interest in PSA Valve and Machine?
If it's done correctly, I should have, but I
But
never had
did you ever
anything.
receive them is the question.
No, I never received anything.
And there was a reference made by Mr. Tobolowski during your cross-examination that you had signed a Texas franchise tax public information report in 2014. Do you remember a reference to that?
I vaguely remember the reference, yes.
Okay, and that was, it's plaintiff's exhibit 6, what they had pre-marked as plaintiff's exhibit 6.
Oh, hold on, I left it in the other room. Sorry, I'm back. Okay, plaintiff's exhibit 6, yes. I'm looking
And
at it.
so did you sign that or did somebody else sign that plaintiff's exhibit 6?
I didn't sign this.
Okay, and so somebody else did, right?
Yes,
Does it show who signed it?
Jose Rodriguez.
Your Honor, I would like to offer plaintiff's exhibit 6 into evidence. I don't think it's been admitted yet, but I would like to offer that.
I believe it's
Mark
been
Wood.
admitted. Let me see. Plaintiff's exhibit 6. You're right. It's not been admitted. Plaintiff's exhibit 6 is admitted.
And on plaintiff's exhibit 6, it shows you as a manager of the company, correct?
That's correct.
And it says if you were an officer or a director, that title should have been provided as well. But the only one that provided was provided was manager, correct?
That's correct.
And the box for director is not checked, correct?
That is correct.
And again, the person who created this document is Mr. Rodriguez, correct?
Objection calls
That
for
is,
violation.
that is correct.
Overruled.
And he was also the one that was responsible for preparing all of the documents for PSA Valve and Machine up through the end of 2017, correct?
That is correct.
And when we look at plaintiff's exhibit 7, you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do. I have it in front of me.
Okay. This appears to be the certificate of formation for PSA Valve and Machine, correct?
Correct.
And it's from April of 2013, correct?
That is correct.
And Your Honor, I'd like to make sure we've offered, or that exhibit, plaintiff's exhibit 7 is in the record as well.
Exhibit 7 is admitted.
And once again, this doesn't establish you as a managing member, but R&P Group and 11 Ventures, correct?
That is correct.
And the person who prepared this is Jose Rodriguez. At least that's what it says is the signature of the organizer on the second page.
That is correct.
And do you recall some discussion when Mr. Chowalski was out taking your testimony about the information, the Texas Franchise Tax Public Information Report for 2019, and I think it was plaintiff's exhibit 27. We don't have it in front of us, but do you remember being
Yes.
asked about that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and do you remember the names of the individuals who were listed under Section A on that plaintiff's exhibit 27?
Yes, I do.
What were those? Who are those individuals?
It was Everardo Perez, it was Leo Conejo, and myself, Everardo N. Perez Jr.
I'm going to object. It appears the witness is reading from a document and cannot see what the document is.
Can you share screen the document? I think it's the one that you had shown earlier, Mr. Tobolowski, exhibit
27.
27, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a copy of it, so.
Yes,
We don't have a copy of it.
so that couldn't be what he's looking at, Your Honor.
No.
He's got notes or something, I think.
Are you looking at something, Mr. Perez?
I was looking at P6, this document here, the one we just talked about.
Okay,
And
all right, let's move
so
along.
those three individuals, you, your father, and is it Leo?
Yeah, Leo Conejo.
Did you guys have an ownership interest together in another company?
Yes, we did.
And what company was that?
PSA pumps and compressors.
Okay, and was it in business in 2019?
Yes.
Do you have any explanation as to how or what could have gone on where this exhibit 27 lists these three individuals, but that on their PSA valve and machine, yet it lists these three individuals who weren't owners of the company?
It was filed incorrectly.
And so is it your testimony then that exhibit P27 is not inaccurate, or there's a mistake in there because it's not for PSA Valve and Machine LLC, but for PSA Pumps and Compressors?
That is correct. It's for PSA pumps and compressors. Those are the owners of PSA pumps and compressors, not PSA valve machine.
And in fact, as I think you testified earlier, PSA Valve and Machine had stopped doing business at the end of 2017, correct?
That's correct.
And was Pumps and Compressors in business in 2019?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
Do you have anything else?
Yes, Your Honor, I'm just checking some notes here. When it comes to and I think we've talked about the UNO outsourcing claims quite exhaustively, but you understood that UNO outsourcing provided some type of services to PSA valve and machine, correct?
That is correct.
And when some of those employees that we saw that were included on the paychecks, one I believe was Jamie Cruz. Do you remember Mr. Cruz?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and was he an employee of PSA Valve and Machine in 2017?
Yes, he was.
Okay, was he an employee of PSA Inc. in 2017
No,
or any time before?
no,
And what about Mr. Cantu? Was he an employee of PSA Valve and Machine in 2017?
yes, he was.
And was he ever an employee of PSA Inc. in 2017
No,
or any time before 2017?
not, but no.
Okay, and Mr. Vasquez, was he an employee of PSA Valve and Machine in 2017?
Yes, he was.
And was he an employee of PSA Inc. in 2017?
No,
or any time before 2017?
no.
Do you recall there being, or did you ever enter any agreement with Uno Outsourcing on behalf of PSA Valve and Machine?
No, sir.
Did you ever enter any agreement with Uno Outsourcing with regard to payroll for PSA Inc.?
No, sir.
Are you aware of any written agreements that were in place with Uno Outsourcing?
No, I am not.
And I believe we talked about earlier, ultimately, who was responsible for hiring Uno Outsourcing?
Jose Rodriguez.
And who introduced Uno Outsourcing to you when, or when it first came out, or who would have introduced Uno Outsourcing to PSA Valve and Machine?
Jose Rodriguez.
And to your knowledge, PSA Valve and Machine had a bank account, correct?
That is correct.
And to your knowledge, did PSA Valve and Machine ever pay any of its invoices to Uno Outsourcing in those 4 years?
Yes, they did.
PSA Inc. Did they pay them all or almost all of the invoices on behalf of PSA Valve and Machine?
No.
And there has been some, question about, hey, your willingness or generosity to pay all these bills on behalf of other entities. But at the time, why were you doing that?
Well, we were all friends. I mean, I felt that they were helping me out. I'm not good at operations. Like I said, I'm a salesman. They were doing a good job on the GMAT side. They were running the operations on that side. I was the head. I was traveling, and so I mean, they needed to get paid. If I had the money, I would have paid it.
Do you recall ever telling Juan that you'd be responsible for the debts of PSA Valve and Machine?
No.
And did you ever represent that you would pay those on its behalf?
No.
And to the best of your knowledge, did PSA Valve and Machine pay the majority of the Uno invoices between 2013 and 2017?
Yes, they did.
All right, let's shift gears over to GMAT. Okay.
Okay.
When it comes to GMAT, you've explained a little bit about you starting up the original GMAT, correct?
GMAT Wireless. Yes, sir.
Okay, and that was in 2017 or 2007, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And just for a better understanding, when there's been some, oh, he really wasn't in charge. Hey, I was doing this. What does GMAT stand for?
GMAT stands for my kids' first initials: Gabby, Mikkel, Ethan, and Trey.
Okay.
So
Say that
you would
again.
have,
it stands for my kids' initials, the first initial of each of their names. It was Gabrielle, Mikkel, Ethan, and Trey. I have 4 kids, 2 girls and 2 boys.
and so that's where we got GMAT from, correct?
That's where we have GMAT from. Yes, sir.
And that's how you started it. It was based off of your children, correct?
That is correct.
And so starting in, I think you explained a little bit about how in 2010 you started doing some work with them, and in 2012 you moved your assets out of GMAT Wireless into GMAT Communications, correct?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Okay. And at that point in time, what role did you take on or have with GMAT Communications?
I was the president and the CEO.
And did anybody else have any titles or were they have any type of management roles that you recall?
They were operations manager, I guess you would say. I didn't really know Juan very well. I knew more of Jose, and they would run operations. The hiring. Juan would take care of all the hiring of the people of the stores, running the personnel, running the payroll, that sort of thing.
And you guys had discussed, was GMAT your primary responsibility, starting around 2012?
What do you mean my primary responsibility?
Well, so what you did for a living, okay? Were you focusing the majority of your work hours towards GMAT, PSA Inc., or something in between?
Yeah, so in 2012, we brought in, I think I had 10 stores by myself. I needed help running them. It was getting to be too much because I had PSA Inc. And GMAT. I brought Jose and Juan on to help. And then at that time, we started to really grow GMAT. So I hired a manager to run PSA Inc., guy by the name of Scott. And I was full-time with GMAT. It was a lot of traveling. I mean, in 2014 to 2017, we opened up over 120 stores in all kinds of, in different states. And we were traveling to different locations. There was we had conferences. We were in San Antonio. Just in Houston, we opened up 26 stores. Corpus Christi, South Texas. There was a lot. It was a lot. There was a lot of traveling.
And when you guys started GMAT Communications, did you three agree on how you guys would compensate yourself for the time that you're putting into the company?
Yes. So originally there was not a lot of money in the company. So if my recollection serves me correct, Juan was going to get $5,000. Jose was going to get $5,000. Between the two of them was 10 grand. I was going to get the other 10. They didn't have another source of income. I did. So I deferred my salary. I think Jose had just had a restaurant that had failed and come out of bankruptcy. So he was hurting financially during that time. And so he had no credit. And so that's what we had agreed on. I mean, I didn't need the money because I had PSA Inc. That's where I make most of my money, all my money. And so I didn't need to take a salary in the short term. We were focused on growth. I mean, that's what we wanted, growth.
And to your knowledge, were Jose and Juan taking their salaries?
Yeah, they had to. That was their only means of to support.
And back in the mid-2000s, you're talking about all these stores that you guys were opening across the country. Can you explain to the court where exactly you were traveling, where you're opening up stores, and basically what you were doing day in and day out when it came to GMAT?
Objection, relevance.
Yeah, this is so far afield from what this case is about. So let's get to this is about offset, attorney's fees, and when it comes to GMAT. That's what it's about. I've let you, Mr. Tobolewski hasn't objected, but if you continue to ask non-relevant questions, I'm just going to shut this down. So,
okay. And the reason I was doing that, Your Honor, and the purpose of that is to, Mr. Paragar had talked about how Mr. Perez had very little involvement in the company. And I'm trying to establish that Mr. Perez did have a lot of involvement in the company, which justified the salary that he is claiming that he was earning. Certainly, if Mr. Perez doesn't get, if the testimony before the court is that Mr. Perez didn't do anything except, sign a few documents here and there, it may not warrant the justification for the salary that he's saying that he was entitled to.
Your Honor, I can also assist by asserting an objection now to this entire line of testimony about an agreement that the statute of frauds would require to be in writing. $120,000 a year indefinitely is something that statute of frauds would require to be in writing. Mr. Perez has testified that it was an oral agreement. It is therefore not something that he can enforce as an offset or otherwise.
Guys, you said you'd be done today. Let's get this. We still have a long way to go, and you're going
Yes,
into
Your
a lot
Honor.
of stuff that's just not relevant. So let's try to
Okay.
get this done.
Yes, Your Honor. And when it came to, you were the primary point person for Cricket, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you eventually stepped down as that primary point person in 2018, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And once you step down, I know you were asked this question earlier, but do you feel that you really should be entitled to that salary after you stop working for GMAT?
Not after I stopped working, of course not. I didn't earn it.
Okay, so would you, when you talk about earning that salary of $120,000 a year, is that up and through what time period?
Up until 2018, from 2012 to 2018.
Not for 10 plus years, like it was
No.
kind of suggested earlier.
No.
And when you guys were opening up your stores, and you guys were opening up a bunch of stores, GMAT, did you have to assist GMAT in purchasing some of those stors?
There's a lot of times that I had to fund the money initially to open up the stores. I know we didn't put them in evidence, but there's a lot of personal checks from me, the same account that to GMAT Communications. We have copies, we just didn't put them in. But yeah, there's a lot of times I helped with GMAT. A lot of times I helped with GMAT.
Okay. And over the years, over those 4 or 5 years, how much money do you think you put in towards GMAT in just purchasing some of these stores and trying to get this goal of growing the business established?
Besides the original store, the original 10 stores that I brought into the fold, on those original 10 stores, I had a little over $250,000 invested in my own money. I probably invested another $250,000 in cash into GMAT to help run the operations.
And when it came to the American Express card, this is certainly something that you were using to try to help establish credit for the company, correct?
Correct.
And you were using it for your personal use and for PSA expenses, correct?
That's correct.
And were there times where would you regularly pay off the bill in full, regardless of what was on the credit card?
Yes, always.
And that would include expenses that were like GMAT business expenses as well, correct?
That is correct.
And you don't have copies of all those old statements anymore, correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to show you exhibit D26.
D26. Okay. Okay.
And
Your Honor, we have an objection to this exhibit. It is hearsay. It lacks authentication. It was not produced in this case. First time we saw it as a designation, but it's definitely hearsay.
What is this exactly?
so, Mr. Perez, can you explain to the court what this is a summary of?
That's a summary of expenses that I had for GMAT. I went back through some of my statements and separated what was Cricket expenses, what I consider Cricket expenses during those months, and just put the totals on the bottom. It's a spreadsheet.
Your Honor, we would also object that his testimony just now that he went back and pulled this information from statements directly conflicts with his testimony from 2 seconds ago, where he said he doesn't have any of these statements anymore.
So, Mr. Perez, when did you do this? Do you remember when you created this? At what point in time?
I can't remember exactly when I created this document, but it was created by me.
Was it prior to the litigation?
Yes, I would say it was prior to the litigation, yes.
Then, Your
And
Honor, it should
can
also be
you-
excluded because it was not produced in this case, despite it going directly to their affirmative defense and responsive request.
Yeah, that does seem like it would. I mean,
So-
did they request this in discovery?
Let me double check.
And did you
see what I
disclose
have.
this amount in request for disclosures?
I don't believe so.
Did you send requests for disclosures, Mr. Tobolowski?
We did, Your Honor, at the very beginning.
Can you look up if this amount was?
Responses.
Did you request documents related to the offset defense? And did they
Your
plead?
Honor, I honestly don't know the answer to that one because I don't believe they pled offset until after the summary judgment hearing, which is after discovery had already closed. So I'm not positive on that one, but let me check this.
Looking at my discovery, Your Honor, from July of 19, I do not see this particular document in there. I'm checking some of my other documents though.
Have you ever produced this in discovery?
I don't remember if I produced in discovery. I did produce it back in May when one of my initial exhibits, when I provided exhibits to everybody. So he's had it for 3 months or 2 months now.
I have no idea what it was.
Yeah, it's not, I will note that it's not been, doesn't have any type of title on it.
Have everything except for their responses, disclosures. Don't have it in my binder. I've got to check one last place. I do not see it here, Your Honor, but I'm nearly positive. I know I have it somewhere, but I'm nearly positive it was not disclosed because again, I don't believe that offset was even pled at that time. That I should be able to confirm.
At this point, I'm going to sustain the objection to defendant 26. If you can prove,
That's
Mr.
fine.
Fincher, that you produced in a
So-
discovery, you can.
Mr. Perez, you did nevertheless incur a number of expenses that were with the business-related expenses on that Amex card, correct?
That's correct.
And I'll go ahead and refer you to defendant's exhibit 25.
Which
Will you share screening 25?
Yes, Your Honor. Okay.
yeah, we
And-
would also object to this as hearsay as well, Your Honor.
What is this? Is this a statement? It doesn't look like a statement, or is it?
And Mr. Perez, can you explain to the court what defendant's exhibit 25 is?
Yeah, this is a statement of my charges from the American Express card for no November 21st, 2015 to December 21st. Well, it's not all here, 2017. I guess the summary at the bottom, $1,153, I guess, is what was spent during that time period. I'm
It
not
says
sure,
on
but
this transaction details prepared for Ed. Who prepared this?
Thinking American
Mr.
Express, we're online.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you obtain this from American Express, Mr. Perez?
Yes, this is from American Express.
Okay.
And the,
These are my charges.
Also the-
for December and December of 2015, I guess, to January of 2016 for 1 month, I'm assuming.
And it actually goes down into March of 2016, correct?
Okay, the March into, yes, okay. Yes, goes all the way down to March. Yeah.
And
we would object that it's hearsay, it's unauthenticated, and Rule 403, I don't know what the probative value is of this. But I would assert that any probative value is outweighed by the prejudicial effect of this being used to try to come up with expenses that Mr. Perez is going to claim he's entitled to reimbursement, which also conflicts with his prior testimony that he does not know the amount.
What exhibit number is this? 27?
25.
25, defendants 25. Defendants 25 is admitted.
And so, Mr. Perez, looking at like the very first charge, it was at the Venetian Palazzo in Las Vegas, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember a trip out there in November of 2015?
Yes, sir. Sure, certainly.
And was it for GMAT or was it for personal?
It was GMAT. GMAT, or Cricket rather. Cricket would host conferences in Vegas twice a year. We had meetings. All the dealers would go. Well, the big ones would go. They'd invite us. And this particular year was held at the Venetian.
And so that's one of these expenses that we've talked about in which you paid for it, but it was a business expense, correct?
That's correct.
And GMAT never reimbursed you for it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And just 4 lines down, we'll see property payment rent, and it's almost $800. Do you see that line entry?
Yes, sir.
And do you know what property payment rent is? Is that what can you?
Yeah, that's the rent on one of the store. That's the rent in the store in Santa Fe.
Okay. And that's
we had a Cricket store.
Is that a reoccurring charge that was on your credit card over the years?
Yes, sir.
And do we see that again on January 8th of 2016?
Yes, sir.
And then again on the second page on February 3rd of 2016.
Yes, sir.
And at that point, the fee, it's $760, not the $800, right?
Right, that's correct.
And we see it again on March 3rd of 2016, again for $760.
That is correct.
And was the Santa Fe store one of the original stores that you had?
The Santa Fe store, I don't believe so.
Do you know how long you were paying the rent, or that the rent for that Santa Fe store was being charged to your credit card?
It was one of the first ones that we opened, I think, in 2010. So it's been a long time.
Okay. And would you regular and routinely pay that then out of your funds?
Yes, of
Out of
course.
your personal funds?
Yes,
And
this
so-
bill was paid out of my personal funds.
And so while we see, 4 different months here, over the course of even through 2017, that's at one charge in particular that was repeated over and over and over again that you took care of, correct?
That is correct.
And there are a handful of other charges on Defendant's Exhibit 25 that you believe are with GMAT related expenses, correct?
Objection.
That is correct.
Can you identify which ones those may be?
On December the 15th, Brandani's Restaurant. I think I'm having a hard time. 1396. Cricket directors came in town, and I took them to a real nice restaurant there in Missouri City. They were in charge of distribution across the country, so
Mr. Perez, let me ask you this. Why did
Sure.
you submit these for payment at the time they were incurred?
I was always told that we didn't have the money. If I could continue to fund it, remember, Jose was working with me there in the office. We were trying to grow cricket. We were cash poor. We were tapped out on lines of credit. We were trying to grow the company as fast as we can and put more stores. And I was told always that I'm going to get the money back. I'll get it back. I'll get it. Same thing with the salary. And so I had the ability to fund it. As a matter of fact, my flights are not even on here because I had a Chase credit card with United. And so I would charge all my flights on that personal card at United because I could get upgraded. So that's why I was always told that it was coming. And we were growing the stores. I was excited. I mean, we were adding stores, weekly.
Do you have a formal procedure that you're aware of for reimbursement of business expenses?
No, there was never any formal, there was no formal expense report.
Were there any emails that you guys are going to be producing about any of this that indicates that there was a request for payment?
No.
Then let's move along.
Okay.
And so ultimately, the relief that you're looking for on your offset is these expenses that you're paying out of pocket, which we certainly can see here was at least $760 a month for several years for the Santa Fe store. Your
Objection.
Your Honor, I'm trying to summarize real quick just to kind of wrap it up. But that's fine. Mr. Perez, are you requesting the court to find that PSA Inc. was not liable to UNO for the debt owed by PSA Valve and Machine?
Yes, I am.
And are you requesting the court to find that you individually are not liable for the UNO debt owed by PSA Valve and Machine?
Yes, sir.
And further, are you asking the court to find that you were not a member of PSA Valve and Machine?
That is correct.
And with regard to GMAT, are you requesting the court to find that you are entitled to an offset against the monies that you were owed on those last three Amex statements?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And that includes money for your deferred compensation.
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. I've heard all this before, so let's try to get it done.
And really quickly, Mr. Perez, I think we discussed it, but things are going south with y'all in 2017. Is that right?
That is correct.
And so when it comes to these last three statements that were not paid, was there a reason you were telling them why you weren't paying those last three statements?
Of course, I wanted to square up with the money that was owed to me.
So that's something that you expressed when these were.
Yes. Oh, yes, sir. They're well aware of it. Yeah.
I'll pass it.
Okay. I will be very brief, Your Honor.
Mr. Tobolowsky, you don't need to ask any questions, but if you want to, you can.
I just want to draw attention to one thing, Your Honor, and then I promise I'll be done. And that is Mr. Perez and Mr. Vinstra, do you mind pulling that off the screen? Mr. Perez, you testified earlier that you did not participate in the operations of PSA Valve Inc., right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also testified that you were not a manager or a member of PSA Valve Inc., right?
I was not a member. Yes, if that's what I said, yes.
But you were the manager?
It's listed as the manager on the paper.
But is it true? Is that what you were? Were you the manager?
I was in sales. I mean, yeah, I mean, they listened to me, yeah, but I was in sales. I mean, I didn't run PSA valve and compressor. I mean, PSA valve and machine. I was a salesman for PSA Inc. I mean, I'm the owner of PSA Inc. That's what I did.
Okay. And so the three PSA entities you have are PSA Inc., PSA valve and compressors, and PSA pump and compressors, and PSA valve and machine. Those are the three PSAs.
Those are the three PSAs we're talking about.
And is it not true, Mr. Perez, that you're running all of those three different PSA companies?
That's not true.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you from your deposition, specifically page 18. Is it not true that at your deposition, I asked you, you're the one running all of the PSA. There's three different PSA companies, right? That's correct. And so you're the one who's running all of those companies, and you answered, that's correct, right?
I did. That's what I answered there.
You were under oath at that deposition, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then I asked you later, and you're the manager of each of the three PSAs, and you said yes, under oath again,
Okay,
right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then when we were talking about your role with PSA pumps and compressors, I asked you, quote, versus PSA Inc., it sounds like you're running that company day in and day out. You say that's correct. And I asked you, what about PSA valve and machine? Are you the sole manager of that company? And you say again, yes, right?
That is correct.
You were running PSA valve and machine, weren't you?
No, sir.
Okay, I pass the witness.
In 2019 was PSA valve and machine. It really wasn't in operation at that time, but if there was any operations, you would have been the only person left to be the manager at that time, correct?
That's correct.
And between its inception in 2017, Jose had a lot of involvement in that, correct?
Right. Yeah, he was there at the office.
And even if you were a manager, you were not an individual member of the entity, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Nothing further, Your Honor. This witness.
All right, call your next witness.
Plaintiffs would call Jose Rodriguez.
All right, Mr. Rodriguez, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony? Are you raising your hand, sir?
Sorry, I was unmuting.
Right. You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Rodriguez, I'm going to try to be brief and to the point. Is it true that what Mr. Perez has testified to, you formed PSA valve and machine at his direction?
That is correct.
Okay, and when you formed PSA valve and machine, or shortly thereafter, did Mr. Perez become a member of PSA valve and machine?
Yes.
And did he remain a member of PSA valve and machine until it ceased operations, whenever that occurred?
That is correct.
Okay. And will you tell me what was Mr. Perez's role with regard to PSA valve and machine?
I mean, he was the sole operator. I heard his testimony that he claims that I was running it, but I couldn't tell you what a valve is or how to function a valve, or so I couldn't tell those employees how to fix a valve or anything like that. So I found that ridiculous. So obviously he has the knowledge. He's the one that instructs those guys what to do and how to do it, and it's on his facility. That was what PSA valve and machine was supposed to do. So I have no idea on the valve business. As he said, I'm an accountant.
Okay. Now, have you heard there was some discussion earlier about PSA valve and machine tax returns?
Yes.
Okay. And you have personal knowledge about the tax returns that were filed for PSA valve and machine, right?
Yes,
Okay, and is it true tax returns for PSA valve and machine were filed for years 2013, 14, 15, 16, and 17, all in October of 2018?
well, I can attest to whether they were filed, but they were prepared by, I guess, Lito or his accountant at the time, and they were presented to the rest of the, the members of that entity. Again, I can attest to the validity whether they actually were filed or not, but they were prepared and they were sent to us by his office.
Okay, and so you said that those tax returns were sent to you by his office, and I've pulled up an email that has not yet been offered or admitted into evidence, but it will be marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 28. Is this the email where you're referring to PSA valve and machine delivering these tax returns to you?
That is correct.
Okay, and does it appear to be a true and correct copy of that email?
Yes,
And those 5 attachments, are those all the tax returns from 2013 to 2017?
yes.
Okay, and again, I know you said it was from Mr. Perez's office, but can you tell us for the record who in his office?
Paola Lopez.
Plaintiffs would offer Exhibit 28 into evidence.
So are you offering, just so it's clear, are you offering just this email or also the attachments?
Also the attachments, but I was going to do those as separate exhibits afterwards. I can also do it as one exhibit if the court's okay with that.
No, what do you prefer, Tony? Separate exhibits.
Separate, okay.
So and this is exhibit what, 28?
28 and then 29, 30, 31, 32, and 33.
Any objections to 28 through 33?
Yes, Your Honor. Especially with regard to Exhibit 28, it's hearsay. This is dealing with it's between two parties who are individuals who are not parties to the lawsuit. I think they're being provided to establish liability as to Mr. Perez individually. And so it's not a party admission by Mr. Perez when it comes to that. And there's no one here to authenticate these emails. Mr. Rodriguez isn't listed as a recipient of the initial email. It looks like
Is he a recipient of any of the emails, Mr. Tobolowsky?
Right here.
Oh, okay.
But not from the person who we were having.
Your Honor, it's from the other person who Mr. Perez testified is the other owner.
Objections overruled, exhibits 28 to 33 admitted.
Okay, all right, so I'm gonna now show you really quickly, Mr. Rodriguez, those attachments. Oops, it's the wrong one. Apologies.
All right, go ahead and show them.
Okay, I'm sorry. It just switched on me. Okay, here, that's the right one. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to jump to, this is 2013. Okay. So does this appear to be the same as tax return as
We can't see it, which the email's still up.
Oh.
Sometimes you have to close it out and then reopen the next one. It happens to me all the time.
Do that right now. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so will you confirm, Mr. Rodriguez, so this is the 2013 tax return for PSA valve and machine. And
Right.
okay. And it looks like this is the initial return. Is that right?
Yes.
And you've dealt with Mr. Perez, zoom out just a little bit. You've dealt with Mr. Perez. How long have you known him and done business with him?
Over 10 years.
And are you familiar with his signature, what it looks like?
Yes.
that appear to be an authentic signature of his?
Yes.
And does the fact that it was also sent from his office further confirm that this is a true and correct copy of the tax return that was probably filed on behalf of PSA Valve and Machine?
Yes, and it was also discussed during a meeting of the members that they were going to present this to.
Okay, and now I'm going to go to the end of this tax return where it has the K-1s attached. And can you tell me what this K-1 is confirming with regard to Mr. Everardo Perez's ownership stake in PSA Valve and Machine?
Yes, that he's listed as a domestic partner and a limited partner or other LLC member.
Okay, so LLC member at, it looks like 0.1%.
Correct.
And do you know who owns the remaining 99.9%?
Well, it's 11 ventures in which he also is the majority owner.
Okay, I'm just going to get
Can I ask a question about this? Because there's something a little confusing to me, and I think it was kind of brought up by opposing counsel. Can you go to the first page?
Yes.
Can you explain why it's signed at 10/12/2018? Why is that? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Is that for me, Your Honor?
Yes, or for either of you, because that's my main.
I believe there were tax implications and tax issues raised by the IRS because there had never once been a tax return filed by PSA Valve and Machine, even though it operated for 4 years and then was terminated. And so in 2018, the year after it was terminated, they had to submit all of their years of tax returns because they were dealing with the IRS.
Okay. That makes
Your
sense.
Honor, I have no clue if that's accurate or not, but I mean, that's kind of speculation as to what's going on here.
Well, I can answer that as well. The issue that happened is when this company was established through 11 Ventures, the partners at 11 Ventures funded, $1 million into this venture, and that was back in 2013. After numerous meetings asking, where is the money and where they went, Mr. Perez was never able to provide a tax return, a financial statement, any sort of accountability of what had happened to that money. So at some point, after the partners started putting a lot of pressure, he presented these tax returns, all of them in the year 2018, in which, if you look at the last one, he claims that he has a huge loss. But again, as to the validity of that loss, again, I can't speak to, because there's really no records. I mean, by then they didn't even have a bank account.
So let me pause you for 1 second. So we've been looking at 2013, which confirm it shows $0 in gross receipts. It also shows $0 in expenses, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then 2014 is the same, right? 0 gross receipts.
Yes.
2015, same thing, 0 gross receipts, 0 expenses.
Yes.
Okay, 2016, 0 gross receipts, 0 expenses.
Yes.
All right, and then 2017, and again, just to confirm, this is now the final return, right? And all of a sudden, they have $642,989 in gross receipts, $500,000 in salary, and $540,000 in rent. Now, let me ask you, there's been discussions about rent and where this business was operating. I think according to Mr. Perez, PSA Valve and Machine operated out of a building that he owned. Is that right?
Yes.
So if PSA Valve and Machine was paying rent for wherever it was operating out of, that means that $540,000 of rent would have been paid to Mr. Perez himself.
That is correct.
And that's why there then ends up being a loss of more than a little over $500,000 over the course of this business's lifespan.
Correct. So in his presentation, he was claiming that not only has he gone through all the funding, but there was an additional 500,000 of losses, which again, he couldn't produce because there was no checks, no bank accounts.
Objection,
no-
Your Honor, relevance to what's going on with regard to the ownership and the
I mean, I think
relevance to this testimony.
I agree with Mr. Veenstra that we really need to focus just on the issue of
Ownership, a member.
ownership, yeah, who owned it. And so I understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, but it
Gotcha.
doesn't really go to the issues of what we're talking about. So
I will move on. So just to confirm, we started in 2013, Mr. Rodriguez. This is the final report in 2017. And just to confirm, Mr. Perez still owned his stake as a member in the LLC when the final tax return was filed, right?
That is correct.
All right. And have you also seen a copy? I'm going to pull up a copy of Plaintiff's Exhibit 27. Now, are you familiar with the public information reports that have been filed for PSA?
Yes, sir.
Because, in fact, I think we saw you filed the first one, didn't you?
That is correct.
Okay. Any reason why Mr. Perez filed the last one?
Objection
Because we-
calls for speculation.
Do you know?
overruled, you can answer.
Because again, at that point, it was, the company was, as far as the rest of the partners knew, it wasn't in operations.
Okay. And is it your understanding that a public information report was filed in 2019, even though the company stopped operating in 2017 for the same reason you just explained, the tax returns were presented to the other owners?
That is correct.
Okay, so just to clarify, that reason being what?
I guess he needed to have the entity active in order to present the tax returns.
And this confirmed.
Objection, he's calling for speculation as to why this was filed by somebody else.
Yeah, lay a foundation.
Okay, and well, let me ask you this. Are you aware of who filed this document?
It's signed by Mr. Perez.
Okay, and so you didn't file the document, right?
No,
How did you come to learn about this document?
through the lawsuit.
Okay, did it come up when Mr. Perez was presenting to the other owners of PSA Valve and Machine or no?
No,
Okay, this document identifies Mr. Perez as a director. Is that accurate of PSA Valve and Machine?
yes.
Objection, lack of foundation to know what was going on in 2019 if he wasn't involved with the company.
Well, it says right there.
Let me ask you this. Is it your understanding? Do you have an understanding? I know you just said this. Was this document filed because the company was operating, or do you not know why it was filed?
No, my belief is that it was filed because
Objection if it's
they
believed,
needed to
Your
be
Honor.
reinstated.
That's fine. Well, let's move on. From the company's formation, which you did, who was the initial officer and director of PSA Valve and Machine?
Mr. Perez.
Did Mr. Perez ever step down as officer or director of PSA Valve and Machine?
No, it was agreement from the get-go that he was gonna be the CEO and operator of the business. No one else knew how to do valves.
Okay, and it's also been said that you were the one who secured Uno Outsourcing on behalf of Mr. Perez's entities, right?
Yes, I was involved with that.
Okay, and when you secured Uno Outsourcing services, who did you secure those services for?
PSA Inc.
Okay, did you ever understand that you were securing services for PSA Valve and Machine?
No, PSA valve and machine, again, the issue with PSA valve and machine is that it never really did anything. He was, since he controlled all the entities, there was no distinction between the two. He was using interchangeable But the employees, you know, my understanding were from PSA. Because
Okay.
PSA Valve didn't have any revenues, so therefore don't have any employees either. They didn't have any activity.
Okay. And in your dealings with Mr. Perez, PSA Inc., and PSA Valve and Machine, I guess as well as PSA Pumps and Compressors, are you able to distinguish one between the other when you're dealing with one of them?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. And I think we've beat the rest of that dead horse into the ground on Uno outsourcing. So let me just make sure we've run through a couple of things on GMAT side. Okay. When it comes to GMAT, is there ever, first of all, is it true that you were affiliated with GMAT from the day it was formed to the present?
Yes, I formed GMAT Communications, and from inception, I have been the CEO until today.
Okay. So did you hear Mr. Perez testify that he was the president and CEO of GMAT Communications?
Yeah, that's completely false.
And did you also hear Mr. Perez testify that he reached an oral agreement with you and Mr. Iparraguirre regarding a salary that he was to be paid?
Yes, I heard that. He said we agreed that it will go back to 2007 when he formed GMAT Wireless for some reason, which I find preposterous. So,
Okay. But did you ever have any agreement with Mr. Perez regarding compensation or salary?
no, of course not. Again, Mr. Perez was never an operator. I know he also said that he took numerous trips to open these stores, but you know, I would venture to say he doesn't even know where the stores are. And, you know, most of these places, you know, he never even heard of, let alone visit those places.
Objection, he's testifying about speculation, not fact.
Well, I know for a fact he's never been to those stores.
I'm moving on, Your Honor. So in terms of the current status of GMAT, have you grown GMAT to be the largest holder of cricket, or does GMAT own or have the rights to the largest number of cricket stores or in the nation? Do you know?
Objection relevant.
Are you one of the largest authorized retailers at this point?
Same.
Okay. And did GMAT ever have any agreement with Mr. Perez for reimbursing any claims or out-of-pocket expenses?
No, again, there was no need for him to have any expenses because he wasn't involved on the day-to-day. So, you know, and we're not allowed to, you know, just take trips to AT&T and take people out. You know, it's forbidden.
Okay. Did GMAT ever have any agreement with Mr. Perez for a car allowance?
No.
Since GMAT's formation in 2012, has Mr. Perez ever demanded that GMAT pay him any of these things he's now claiming as offsets?
No, again, he never did anything for GMAT.
Okay, and then the last thing that I do have to clarify is Mr. Perez testified about why he was using the GMAT credit card. And so I'm curious, he testified that it was to help GMAT build credit. Is that true?
No, I did hear Mr. Binstra's recollection of how that happened, but I'm not sure how, you know, if anybody's familiar with how those work. The credit card is under the company's umbrella, but there has to be someone, a person, whether it's an officer or an owner, attached to it, where is how the, you know, you get approved or not, right? You know, I just happen to have a, you know, close to 800 credit score. So we were given the ability to get a Platinum American Express, which, you know, if the court doesn't know, those don't have a specified limit. So there's really no need to, you know, have any usage or anything to build up a credit because they're basically limitless, right?
There'd also
At least that's how they advertise it, right? So we never needed to have his expenses on our credit card other than to help him while he was going through some tough times.
Okay, so to make sure I understand, Mr. Vinstra, as long as Mr. Perez had the GMAT corporate credit card with him, there was never going to be a limit issue. There wouldn't have been a reason for him to need to put any expense on his own credit card.
Never.
And is there any other agreement or reason why GMAT would owe any money to Mr. Perez as we sit here today?
No, sir.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any cross?
Yes, Your Honor. On the exhibit, plaintiff's exhibit 28, the email that was forwarded to you from Mr. Patel and was originally
Yes.
drafted by Paula,
Yes.
it referenced that there was input from you, correct?
Can you, I don't have the exhibit in front of me.
I can pull it up for you, Sam.
Can you put it up?
Can you pull it up?
Yes. Can you guys-
And so it says here, Ms. Lopez said this is what Bo, our accountant, thought it was best to do based on the information we have and the way Jose initially set it up. Is that, so some of this information is what they got from you, right?
No, it says that, you know, it was the information that Bo, their accountant, found, and based on the way I set up the original entity, not that I set up anything else.
Do you know what they were referring to on what you had set up then?
The entity.
answers, yeah.
Okay, but initially I mean, at least what we see on plaintiff's exhibit 7 is that R&P Group is an initial member and 11 Ventures is an initial member, right?
Yes, originally, yes.
And do you have any documents to show R&P Group transferring its ownership interest over to Mr. Perez?
No, I don't think we have any documents. I know that we relinquished our ownership.
No
through
objection
RMP.
after no, Your Honor, non-responsive.
Fine.
So at some point, and you are an owner of R&P Group, are you not? Or you have control an entity that owns R&P Group?
Yes,
Okay. And so if somewhere along the way, you're saying R&P Group transferred everything to 11 Ventures with the exception of, and Lita, with the exception of 0.1%, is that correct?
what's the question, Sam?
Is it your position that R&P Group transferred its ownership interest without to either Mr. Perez or, you know what, I strike that, but you don't have any documents to show that transfer that interest, correct?
The tax returns.
But you don't have the documents to show that this interest was transferred to Mr. Perez.
Well, it wasn't transferred to Mr. Perez.
So R&P Group, did they transfer their interest to 11 Ventures?
To both 11 Ventures and Mr. Perez.
Okay, so they transferred everything but 1.1% is what your position is, correct?
Yes, because Mr. Perez is the majority owner of 11 Ventures already.
And do you have any operating agreement from 11 Ventures to show that he's this majority owner of 11 Ventures?
I mean, I don't have it with me, but there is an operating agreement that.
Do you have an
names him.
operating agreement for PSA Valve and Machine to show who the initial or who the members were?
I don't recall.
And so somewhere along the way, you may have created something that says Mr. Perez had this very, very tiny interest in PSA Valve and Machine. And that may have been information then that possibly Bo, the accountant, found. Does that sound accurate?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
And just so we understand, what we're trying, you all are trying to do here is establish Mr. Perez as a 0.1% owner of R&P or PSA Valve and Machine, and not pursuing any type of recovery from 11 Ventures LLC.
No, the reason it was, set up that way,
Just with nothing after no, Your Honor, unresponsive objection. The Patel brothers own 11 Ventures LLC, which are also your business partners in GMAT, right?
11 Ventures LLC is owned by Mr. Perez, both Patel brothers, and two other brothers by the last name Kotak.
But and the Patel brothers are your business partners, correct? In GMAT.
That is correct.
So we're going after Lido, but nobody else that's involved in this transaction based on his 0.1% that you left behind for him,
Objection,
correct?
argumentative and relevance.
Sustained.
But you were the one who left behind the 0.1% for Mr. Perez, though, correct?
No, that was prepared by them, by him, I guess.
But you were
Those tax
the,
returns were prepared by him, not by me.
based on information from you, according to Bo, the accountant.
No, sir, that's not what Bo said.
Bo
If
said
you
it was
read-
based on information.
Well, if you
from
read closer, it says it's based on Bo's.
Guys, at this point,
No,
you're just
objection.
arguing with each other. You're
Yeah.
not asking questions. So let's keep moving.
And when it comes to Mr. Perez, he was the one that had the initial relationship with Cricket and AT&T, correct?
With Cricket.
Okay. And it blossomed into AT&T when AT&T took over Cricket, right?
But
Objection.
at that point, he didn't have the relationship.
But yeah, he was the person who was what was his role with Cricket? Like he had some type of, he was the point person for them that they came to for everything. And he carried $1 million line of credit. Isn't that right?
No,
No. And when when GMAT communication started, is it your testimony that Amex gave you an unlimited credit card at that point with GMAT Communications LLC when it initially started?
yes, sir, I still have it.
And they didn't set you up, they just set you up basically unlimited and not had you build that up, correct?
Well, you can call Amex on their business practice.
And part of the reason that Lido had to go through this process of helping build up the credit is because you had already filed for bankruptcy with your restaurant, correct?
Objection.
That's false.
That states the witness testimony.
That's false. I've never filed for bankruptcy.
And just to make sure I have it right, he was the dealer principal for GMAT, correct?
He was listed as the dealer principal, which is just an honorary title.
Objection to anything after yes.
Overruled.
Pass the witness.
Nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
Okay. Call your next witness.
At this point, I was gonna, if the court wants to take like a 5-minute break, I was gonna have a conversation with Mr. Veenstra. I think we both have claims for attorney's fees. And since we've already gone almost the whole day, I guess either we could both call ourselves and testify in the narrative or possibly agree to present attorney's fees by affidavit unless the court.
So let me tell you this. This is what I have decided on the case, or I'm leaning towards deciding, but it's what I'm going to decide, is on the issue of offset. I'm going to find no offset. On the issue of the only issue I'm going to find liability against, obviously PSA valve. The only issue I have, and I think it's a close call, is whether, and I'm going to find PSA Inc. is not responsible in any way for that. The only question I have, and really to me, the most difficult issue is whether or not Mr. Perez is responsible for the debts. I think that's a very close call based on the evidence, but I'm going to, so we could handle this a variety of ways. So the only attorney's fees evidence I would need would be Mr. Tobolowski's, I believe. I don't know any reason I would need Mr. Veenstra's. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but so the closing arguments, if you want to do closing arguments, should be centered on the issue of whether or not Mr. Perez should be liable for the debts of PSA valve and machine. You guys want me to put you in a breakout room so you can talk about the attorney's fees issue?
Sure, Sam, unless you already know that you don't want
I
to.
was going to say, if you wanted to, if we want to do something where you submit an affidavit and you want to give it to me and we can submit it to the court. I know you already have an affidavit that
Okay.
I don't know. I forgot the date that you had on it, Michael, but I think it's already
Yeah, I'll do it.
before the court. So if you want,
Is there any way you guys
exhibit,
could you guys just stipulate to the amount of attorney's fees? Is there a way you guys could do that?
I can work with, I mean, again, Sam, I don't know if you were going to oppose it, but I can give you the amount and you can.
Why don't I put you in a breakout room? I don't want to put Mr.
Okay.
Weaver on the, and do you need me to put anyone else in the breakout room or just you two?
I think just us two is fine.
Okay, and you know how to leave the room and come back?
Yes.
Right. We'll take a 10-minute break.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. So hold on.
Okay, so we have some visitors here. Where are you guys, which court are you guys with? Oh, with Judge Benson? And where do you guys go to school? Where? UNT Dallas, okay.
And I'm at the University of District of Columbia. I've been here for a couple of weeks now, so I've gotten a chance to sit in the court.
Hey, Matt, okay,
Yes,
welcome
I was
back.
the last group of-
You're wearing masks today, so.
Oh, yeah, I can be here too, so.
Okay. And what are y'all's names? Emily what? Right? You can wear it if you want to here. I don't require it, whatever you want to do.
Haley Jenkins.
Taylor Jenkins, what was your name?
Erica Stevens.
Erica Stevens. You guys all want to introduce yourselves and where you go to school?
Hi, I'm Zach McConnell, and I go to UT.
Hi, Sarah Horton, and I go
I'm a little camera right in Horizon School at UT.
I'm not sure, when I go to UT, I do as well.
And then we have one other intern who just left, right? Fine.
And so it's,
So-
and they're also both.
Well, this summarized, the second half of summary, especially UT. So, first half of summary, four of your classmates. I don't know if you knew Joseph Alua or Asanya Gonzalez, Liz Rodriguez, Melissa Daniels. Anyway, so then I also have one UT person. So, well, I wanted to get y'all's thoughts. You heard this evidence that about the. I'm not. Oh, you're right. I'll have you. Okay. I thought it was gonna be done. I don't know what we're doing. So the other issue in this case is the issue of attorney's fees. It's just so you kind of know a couple of issues on attorney fees. You guys probably want to take notes about this, the attorney's fees. So when you're claiming attorney's fees, some things that you're going to learn about. Have you guys learned at all about attorney's fees, covering attorney's fees in your first year? I don't remember if you guys learned that or not. So a couple things to think about when you're trying to recover attorney's fees. So the general rule in America, you'll learn this very early in your career, is that you cannot recover attorney's fees from the other side. We're not like English, which is what you should pay. But out of the, so that's the general rule. But like many general rules, there's a million exceptions. And so the two biggest exceptions are if you can statutorily recover it under a certain causes of action allow for attorney's fees. So remember the book I talked to you about, the causes of action book that from the Texas Rules of Causes of Action. That book is a really good place to look first because you really do, the value of a claim can be vastly different if you can recover attorney's fees. Is that more? She giving me work. So that can be a big issue, is whether or not the cause of action covers it. And then you can also recover attorney's fees if the contract allows for that. So, and I can't go into all the details about this, but one of the big issues that comes up, and again, this is like a 10-hour course of trying to summarize it. One of the issues that I see attorneys frequently make mistakes on. So, and you guys, this is going to be, for those of you who have commercial litigation, this is going to be a big issue in kind of cases that you're handling. Is let's say you have 3 claims. Let's say you have a negligent, let's say you have a fraud claim, you have a breach of contract, and you have you have a claim for anyway, another claim that doesn't allow for attorney's fees. So the Texas Supreme Court has said when you are asserting a claim. So let's say that Sarah has sued Andrea, and she sued numerous causes of action. Some of them allow attorney's fees, some of them don't allow attorney's fees. You have to segregate the attorney's fees by what work was done on recoverable claims versus what work was done on non-recoverable claims. And you might think, well, that doesn't seem like a big deal. Well, you can have cases that last for years and years and years. And you can have cases where there are multiple claims or multiple defendants. So it's even if, let's say that Sarah has sued Andrea, see you later. Andrea and Zach, and some of the claims against Zach are, all the claims against Zach are not recoverable, but some of them against Andrea are. Is this all making sense? You have to segregate out. Again, I can't tell you how difficult this is in practice. And so what initially the Supreme Court said is, well, if the work was inextricably intertwined, so that let's say you were doing the deposition of a witness and you were asking about questions related to recoverable claims versus questions related to unrecoverable claims, you could say they were inextricably intertwined and you can recover for all of that time. That makes sense? Well, Supreme Court in Tony Goyo Motors and other cases since then have said, that's too easy, and attorneys are abusing this. And so they have said that you have to look at cause of action by cause of action, and you have to analyze each particular hour of work essentially that you're doing. That's not how we put it, each particular hour of work. I commonly see cases where people go to trial and they don't remember that they have to segregate. I will tell you, I have had two or three cases, at least two, maybe three, that have been reversed because the attorneys did not properly segregate. Or I didn't do a proper job of segregation, even though I thought it was pretty clear. And so I'm not gonna go into all the other issues related to attorney's fees, but the issue of segregation is a big deal and you shouldn't forget it because it's gonna be very.
Are you just, like I said, whenever you have two claims that are uniquely entwined, how are you supposed to segregate those two claims? Whenever the
So
same
it's,
segregation-
you have to look at the work that's being done. So let's say that you have a, let's say you're taking Andre's deposition and 3 hours are related to, it seems kind of ridiculous to me, but this is the way we have to do it. So 3 hours of the deposition are related to her contract claims and 30 minutes related to just her fraud claims, which may not, you can't recover attorney's fees usually, then you could recover the 3 hours, but not the 30 minutes. But as an attorney, that's not how I mean, even if you're a billable attorney, you don't segregate, that's not how you do your work. And you don't have enough, even if you're very, very detailed in doing your billing statements, a lot of times there's not enough information to figure out what is this work being done for. But it's something also to ask your managing partner, whoever you're working for in a case, hey, are we gonna have an issue of segregation? Should I make sure to include more details in my billing statements? I don't know. You know, ask that the first time that they get mad at you, I'm asking again. But do you see what the issue is you may be working on a case and you just put basic notes about it. And then it comes in front of Judge Hoffman or Judge Moyer or Judge Benson, and you say, and they say, hey, I can't tell based on Zach's notes, was this done for the contract claim? Was this done for the fraud claim? Is this from the recoverable claim or not? Does that make sense? You see what the issue is? So anyway, but attorneys, that's what we're dealing with right now. On a case like this, all of the claims are recoverable, so you don't have the issue of segregation. So hopefully they'll be able to reach an agreement on these smaller type claims. A lot of times there's an agreement reached. A couple other things about attorneys and just practical stuff. Attorneys, a lot of times, and I think this is a good idea, don't want to submit the issue of attorney's fees to a jury. The weird thing that I've seen over the years is juries are really, really like strict about, I don't want to report, award a penny more than I have to for pain and suffering or for mental anguish or whatever, but they'll award hundreds of thousands of dollars for attorneys fees. They don't seem to be at all concerned about that, which I find very strange, but I've seen that again and again and again. So that's another thing, but a lot of times attorneys will just say, hey, I'm gonna let the judge decide, even though we may have a jury trial, I'll let the judge decide the issue of attorney's fees, and that's probably not a bad idea. It's a way to short circuit the trial. You guys have any questions? Okay. I give them little lectures during there. I don't know if they're expensive, but it's up to you guys. It's my parents are both professors, so it lets me get a little bit of that out. Or did I get kicked out? Where am I? Okay, never mind. Somebody follow her around the street.
Our last, interview was
Oh, keep doing that, okay. Well, but they're not in the room, but yeah, obviously.
You're an asshole, Jose. Oops. We're unmuted.
Are you guys back?
We are, Your Honor. We're going to do a brief closing and then submit attorney's fees, I think via affidavit tomorrow. If we need to hop on a call with the court, we can arrange for that, if that's all right with you.
Okay.
Okay. And I will be very brief, I promise.
All right, Tony. We have 3 minutes aside. Andrea, can you keep time? You may proceed, Mr. Tobolowski.
Thank you, Your Honor. So in focusing on the point at issue, I simply want to focus on, hopefully the court can see what is up, and that is the two most important documents, I think, are the tax returns collectively, and even more important, the Texas Texas Franchise Tax Public Information Report. It states, as a matter of fact, that Mr. Perez is a director. It does not state the term for which he is serving as director, and he has signed that public information report himself. He's acknowledged it's his.
You're showing right now the American Express.
Oh, okay.
Just FYI.
I'm glad you said something because I was looking at something different. Hopefully, can the court now see the public information report?
Yes.
Okay. And so again, Mr. Perez is identified here as a partner, but more importantly, as a director of PSA Valve and Machine LLC. The term for his serving as director of this entity is undefined, which is important, and I'll say why in a second. It also is signed by Mr. Perez, and with the declaration that everything above is true and correct to the best of his knowledge. And he did acknowledge that that was his signature, although he did also try to convince Your Honor that he doesn't remember signing this document, even though he identified all of the other individuals and information hereon. And the reason that information is so important, Your Honor, is because of the case of Bruce v. Freeman Decorating Services, Inc., and which specifically says that testimony about not being a member, which is what Mr. Perez has provided the court in terms of evidence regarding whether he is or is not a member, was not sufficient to overcome the other evidence that was presented to prove Mr. Bruce was a member. And that is a public information report that identified Mr. Bruce as a member, as a director of the LLC. And the court made specific note that he signed and declared that it was to the best of his knowledge. And again, as a result, the court concluded that evidence was legally sufficient to support the finding that he was a director. But on top of that, Your Honor, there are tax returns from every year that existed, every year where PSA Valve and Machine existed, all of which identify Mr. Perez as a LLC member on the K1. And again, these were filled out by Mr. Perez himself. Although Mr. Perez identifies his signature, he once again doesn't want to acknowledge that he's the one who filled them out. But I think that the evidence shows that he did. Thank you.
All right.
Yes, Your Honor. As we said briefly, Your Honor, the issue is whether or not Mr. Perez was a member of PSA Pumps or Valve and Machine. The most important documents that I believe that the court needs to focus on are the Plaintiff's Exhibit 7, which is the certificate of formation. That was from April of 2013. It was created by Mr. Rodriguez. So someone who is diametrically opposed to Mr. Perez in this whole lawsuit, he does not even list Mr. Perez as one of the managing members on this document. He includes RMP Group and 11 Ventures LLC, 2 LLCs, and that's how PSA Valve and Machine LLC was set up, was to have its members be LLCs to protect their individual owners, much like the law permits. Then we go to 2014, where again, Mr. Rodriguez created the Texas Franchise Tax Public Information Report, and again, does not list Mr. Perez as a director. He lists him as the manager, and it could have been an option as director, officer, or manager. He is the one that put in manager, a person who is, again, diametrically opposed to Mr. Perez. And he was the one who signed it. He was the one who created the documents and set up the entity for this to happen. He said that he testified that shortly after that certificate of formation was made, that they changed it. Well, then why wasn't that included a year later, or more than a year later, 18 months later, when he signed the Texas Franchise Tax Public Information Report? He would have made him a director at that point, and he didn't. And the reason they didn't is they knew he wasn't the director. He knew he wasn't an owner of the company. The only evidence that has any bearing to suggest Mr. Perez had any ownership interest individually in the PSA valve and machine are documents that were created after PSA valve and machine started or stopped doing business. The testimony said they stopped doing business in 2017. Those tax returns were not even prepared until October of 2018. And they were prepared based on information that was from Mr. Rodriguez.
But your client signed them, correct?
Mr. Perez, his signature's on them. He testified he doesn't recall anything about signing them. And frankly, as you saw, he doesn't have a lot of understanding as the stuff he's signing. But that's what happened. And then the same form, the 2019 Texas franchise, as Mr. Perez testified, that was for another entity. The owners that were even listed in there, or the managers and titles, were listed were his father and Leo, who weren't even owners involved with PSA valve machine. For that reason, Mr. Perez should not be there. And more importantly, on a guidance of equity, he's a 0.1% owner, according to them.
All right. This is kind of a mess how these companies were set up, and I mean, no minutes, anything. It doesn't make this the easiest. It's a good example of what how it's important to set up these things correctly. I do think it's kind of not the model clarity on when whether and when Mr. Perez became a member, but based on the totality of the evidence, preponderance of the evidence, I find the most as the judge of the credibility of the evidence, I'm going to find that at the time these expenses were incurred, that Mr. Perez was a member of the Mr. Veenstra, you're showing your disappointment in your face.
I was looking at my client. That's all. He had stepped into the room, and so I was just.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay. And so I'm going to find that he was the member at the time and is responsible for these expenses. So, or for this invoice. So just to kind of clarify all the rulings, no offset. Attorney's fees for the plaintiff, but we'll determine the amount tomorrow if you guys can't reach an agreement. And then, or did you guys want to do dueling affidavits, or how did you guys want to do the attorney's fees?
I'm hopeful we can reach an agreement, but if not, that we'll submit dueling affidavits.
Okay. And then what time are your hearings tomorrow, Mr. Tobolowski? Could you do?
I can tell you right now. Okay, I have a hearing at 9:45, 10:30, and then nothing until 1:15. So I can do it end of the day, or
why don't we plan on doing it at, I'll actually be here in the morning. I'll be physically here at the courthouse. If you want to.
Okay.
We'll do it at 11. Mr. Veenstra, you can appear via Zoom. Do you think you'll be done by 11, Mr. Tobolowski?
Let me see which of those was the first one, because one of them is a summary judgment hearing. The first one is a 30-minute setting. So.
And what time was the second one again?
It's pretty close after. It's at 10:30. So that one will be very quick though. So I do think that I'll have time between the 10:30 hearing. That's going to be a 15 to 20 minute hearing.
You want to
And
just, how about 11 o'clock?
I think that works. That should work. And
Right, Mr. Beans?
I will obviously come, Your Honor, to the courtroom as soon as I get out of that hearing.
That's fine. I just will need to leave here by around 11:40. So just FYI. And then Mr. Veenstra, does that work for you? You can be remote if you'd like.
Yes, Your Honor. I can, I'm free all morning and all afternoon. So, and I can come in via Zoom. I could even do a telephone if that's more convenient with.
No, Zoom is easier and it'll be easier for you too, I think. So we will see you guys at 11. Mr. Tobolowsky, once we get this done, prepare the judgment for this.
Okay.
Make sure that the beginning of the judgment, instead of on this date, that it's on July 19, 2022, that this trial was heard, and then share that with Mr. Veenstra before you submit it to me. And if you could agree as to form, that would be great. Hopefully this shouldn't be too complicated. Anything else we need to chat about before 11 tomorrow?
Your Honor, just to clarify, there was no liability against PSA Inc., right?
No PSA. You're exactly right. No liability against PSA Inc.
Right. I think
And
that's
Your Honor,
it.
I certainly didn't mean any disrespect when I.
Not at
signed.
all. Not at all. It was kind of funny because you're up in front of, I have a courtroom full of people watching you guys. And for some reason you're still spotlighted. So your face it was just kind of a funny thing. I wasn't upset at all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean, I was just kind of frowning at my client who
Yeah,
was
that's-
listening in my office.
That's okay. No worries at all. No worries at all. We'll see you. And if you guys reach an agreement, can you just let Rhonda know? And, but otherwise we'll plan on seeing you guys at 11 tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you.